I should start with the truth. I never meant to become obsessed. It was just background noise, a crutch to help me drift through nights that stretched too long. Rain recordings, endless hours of falling water, patterned static that lulled me when sleep refused to come. My library had dozens rain on windows, rain on metal roofs, even deep forest storms. I cycled them like medicine, and for weeks it worked. Then something shifted, one file among the rest. The difference was small, but I felt it before I knew what it was. It began as a hum beneath the water hiss. At first so faint I thought the file was corrupt, encoded badly. But its texture was too deliberate, smooth, almost tonal. I replayed the file against others, lining up tracks, listening for comparison. This one bowed in the middle, as if the waveform drooped under its own weight. My editor showed no splice marks, nothing inside the file tree. Yet my ear caught the bending. I marked a timestamp, 2:37, where it seemed most alive. I listened again. And again, I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been working long shifts, stacking late study hours, body hollowed out by caffeine. When you're wired like that, the line between true and false gets porous. Still, at 3 in the morning, I strapped on my headphones, tightened the band until the cups pressed hard against my skull, and waited for it. It came, but this time it was not steady. It pulsed. It quickened and slowed, and I felt the rhythm lock onto me. My pulse thumped harder, then softer, the hum threading against it like a duet. My chest prickled. I ripped the headphones free, heart rattling fast, and immediately played the track out loud. The hum dulled in open air, blurred by room acoustics. But once more in my ears, it closed in intimate, closer than breathing. I could measure it against the blood moving in me. That was not imagination. Not thunder, not encoded static. Something was choosing how to beat. I turned to my recorder, a cheap meter unit I bought years ago when I thought I'd start producing music. It never impressed me, usually flat. This time the needle spasmed when I hit play, quivering in jagged spikes where the frequency should have been level. My screen showed shadows between the known ranges, almost a ghost band. I leaned forward until my eyes watered and my head began to ache. Still there. Still active. Once I allow suspicion, I have to test. I toggled through gear, checked drivers, reinstalled codecs. Nothing wrong. No cracked solder, no hiss from ground loops. Power stable. This hum survived all changes like it was nested inside the file beyond the tools that I owned. That rattled me. I saved a separate cut, isolating the window to a short snippet, only the part with the undercurrent. I labeled it File A and stored it on a clean folder, as if naming it meant control. After I shut playback down, the room did not feel empty. Silence is supposed to cover after an audio stop, that blank space of reprieve. But File A lingered. My ears rang in sympathy, precise, not random. Almost like residue folded into the air. I shook my head, paced my room, splashed water across my face, and waited for it to fade. It did not. The sound was absent, yet its shape clung to me, like phantom pressure. I pressed palms against my ears until they hurt. Nothing lessened. I lay down, forcing my breath slow. That was when new doubt found me. Rain tracks were supposed to be neutral, indifferent. So how did a hum gliding under them burrow so far into me? Logic strained. My thoughts looped back to pulse. Beat to beat, my body remembered. I started counting seconds. The count never stayed consistent. Wave, hum, pause, then another beat, adjusting, as if listening back through me. By the fourth replay that night, I realized I wasn't just observing anymore. File A observed in return. Ridiculous, I scolded myself. Out loud, to break the spiral. Just electronic bleed, some ultrasonics leaking from encoding. But who was I trying to convince? My mouth dried as my monitor threw sharp lines of light across the wall. Those lines flickered while the track unfolded. Faint sync I couldn't explain. That part of me wanted to delete it outright. Trash it, wipe cache, scrub the drive until clean. But deleting proved nothing. Curiosity pressed harder. If the hum adapted, if it leaned against me rather than code, I needed evidence. I set a new session, capturing microphone input while playing the file. The rig showed overlap, meter spiking not only where file A pushed but also half a second late, like response. When the sound ceased, the meter did not drop at once. A tail carried through the room's ambient air, unmeasured before. I leaned closer to the monitor, nose nearly touched to plastic, burning eyes focused. I whispered aloud and nothing, just my name under breath. And the line twitched. Not large, but twitch enough. Could be coincidence, I told myself. But what value do coincidences have once they repeat? The urge to test grew reckless. I tapped my desk 3 times. The hum held steady for a second, then folded, shifting faintly down pitch. My mouth opened dry. The sensation prickled hair from scalp to wrist. I did not move. I replayed that response over, mind telescoping in one thought. It was not me imagining. A storm gathered outside near dawn. Real rain against glass, the sound that once calmed me. But I could not feel soothed. This hum had rewritten even natural water into suspicion. Every drip could hide it. Each rumble could be something waiting. By the time the sky brightened, my chest ached in rhythms not my own. The screen kept file A staring at me, a name I wrote, proof captured. But proof of what? I wasn't sure. To close it meant silence, but silence no longer existed. The hum had carved itself into a new space, shy between layers, whispering like invitation. One answer was coming, whether I searched or not. A little past 9, I tried to play other tracks, safer ones. Forest rainfall, tin roof scatter. They all wove normal flat. But under each I worried. Did I hear it again? Did it mask itself elsewhere? My hands shook on the keyboard. My eyes blurred from strain. One moment I thought all of it was gone, just fatigue driving me. The next, it surfaced thin, cut short like it knew I was waiting. I could not trust myself anymore. But the file existed outside me, glowing in directories, weighed in kilobytes I had measured. It lived regardless. I forced myself to replay this snippet one more time, at full volume, headphones sealed against my skull. My stomach tightened while the rain unfolded, steady, harmless. Then, faintly deeper, the layer rose again. A hum, bending. This time, though, it didn't stop at my pulse. My lights flickered. My display warped as if pressed from behind. Something shifted in the quiet, not in me, but in the air itself. The floor under my feet trembled as though resonance had found solid matter. I inhaled once, caught between leaving the file and letting it finish, unable to act. And then, from deep inside the hum, sharp, sudden, came the sound of breathing that was not mine. I told myself I would not touch file A again. Not after the way my lights flickered, not after the breath that shivered through the noise. But avoidance works like gravity. It holds until fatigue or weakness tips you back. By the second night, I was searching through the rest of my archive, scrolling folder after folder. Years of rain recordings collected for comfort filled my drive. Most I had forgotten about. I clicked one at random, rain on a tin roof. It filled the room in blank waves, ordinary, safe. And then, nestled low, I caught it. A blip dot, it was so brief I almost missed it. A spike 3 measures in, barely a cough cut short. But the shape felt too clean, not like crackle. I wanted to dismiss it as clipping, a file aged by bad compression. Yet the meter jerked, just once, sharp. My chest tightened. I listened again, fingers pressing harder on the keyboard. The spike fired in the same place, regular, not random. I opened another track, rain against glass this time. My stomach twisted when it came, another hidden pulse, faint, skipping like an exhale trapped by distance. Different points in time, but same sensation. My recordings, once simple, had begun to feel like graves holding signals. I scrub it across the waveform, zooming into peaks until the pixels fractured wide. Patterns crawled through the noise. No human voice, not yet but breath. Too quick for words, too sure for chance. Curiosity overtook fear. I stretched the playback, dragging the timeline slow. At half speed, the noise sank deeper, a thick drone knotted with hitches. At 1/4 speed, it staggered open. My ears clenched, heart flexed hard. The hiss broke apart into shapes, nearly syllables, almost throat sounds stretched thin. My hand trembled against the mouse, and in the low glow of monitor light, the space felt rancid with presence. The power flickered again. I grabbed a flashlight from the desk drawer, clicked it on, and worked under its narrow beam. My hands shook worse as I adjusted gain levels, pulling the line higher, flattening background. Each cycle revealed fragments, not language, yet insistent. It wanted to be heard. I had to steady myself. Document, don't spiral. I typed notes line by line. File names. Timestamps. Behavior when slowed. Gear used an entry-level interface. 12-gauge shielded cables. Direct input straight to monitor. No alterations. No plug and bleed. I wanted to believe in a fault, some buzz from power lines or a codec error. But listing details didn't kill the dread. It only showed me how slim escape was. The flashlight sputtered, dimmed, then caught steady again. I heard my own breath amplify in the room, harsh in the silence between loops. Fear collapsed in on me until I acted. I spoke. Not much, only my name, said slow, leaning close to the microphone. I added it to the track, voice baked into the storm. Part of me prayed nothing would come of it. On playback, for one impossible instant, the recording seemed to answer. Not loud, not clean, but like the static flexed around my syllables, draped my voice, and gave it back. I froze, tongue pressed hard against my teeth, scalp cold. I replayed, thinking error. Once, nothing. Twice, I thought I caught it. Third time, certainty. My name, whispered in the drag of falling rain. I shoved back from the desk, flashlight beam wild on my ceiling. Sweat soaked my shirt, though the room was cold. I waited, ears straining against the hush after playback stopped. Silence close enough to choke. I thought about sending the files to someone who'd know better. An old broadcast tech I used to correspond with. A man who knew the underside of frequencies. How signals bled into places they weren't allowed. Without pausing to explain, I sent him the samples, attached notes, begged for analysis. Then I sat staring at an empty inbox, refreshing in desperation. No reply came. Hours wore down. My eyes bled red from glare. I gave up, crawled back to listening, obsessive. My notes grew sloppier. I logged file lengths, cable checks, slight changes of volume. Every time I told myself, this is the last run. But I replayed again, hand tugging the headphones tight, eyes locked on the spectrum. The static thickened like wet cloth, heavy with intent. Somewhere deep in a slowed quarter-speed loop, I thought I discerned two beats close together, sharp then faint, like consonants. My throat clenched dry. I leaned close and whispered again, a broken test. Nothing at first. Then shimmer. An echo carried, less than a breath, bending my shape against water hiss. I pulled the phones off so fast they rattled across the desk. I stood, every muscle ringing with panic. It could not be real. I told myself every file cracks, every analog chain leaks, every algorithm glitches. But the more I explained, the more brittle the words sounded. Behind each denial lived the certainty. My voice had returned to me from inside the storm. I shut the project folder down, closed the rig, killed the screen. I even unplugged cables, coiling them fast like snakes. The glow of the monitor bled into my sight long after it darkened. I sat in the half-shadow, cold flashlight still tight in my grip, listening to nothing. Nothing except the ringing in my ears, which by then no longer sounded like mine. And though I swore I would leave it, forget the files, purge the drive if I had to, I knew even then it was temporary. Doubt gnawed harder than fear. Whatever threaded itself between drops was not gone. It was waiting. And I would return, because I needed to know if it knew me better than I knew myself. It began to feel deliberate the moment I realized the hum was not bound to me alone. I had assumed my library was tainted, files collected too long ago to trust, encoded on gear that speckled noise like dust. But that night I went deeper, chasing samples far outside my archive. Every corner of the web holds rain loops, strangers uploading their own hours of storms, roof drips, forest washes. I pulled them in, half curious, half daring the anomaly to repeat. And there it was. Again, hidden low, fused beneath the hiss where no one listening casually would care. This was not a watermark. I tested against those. A watermark flares at fixed bands, a digital stamp. This moved different, bending new inside each track, but holding a shape consistent enough to identify. I ran spectral views side by side until my eyes burned from the neon. The hum curved out in a bloom, always arcing in the same tilted oval, no matter the origin. Different uploaders, different equipment, yet the contour matched within margin. It was not chance noise. It was identity. I should have felt wonder. Instead, cold fear slotted in my ribs. Because fingerprints, once found, speak of intention. And rain is born random. Drops strike where chaos tells them. But in these files, chaos had been threaded like beads on a string. A controlled repetition, wearing the mask of accident. I could not sit still. My hand clawed the desk as if to anchor myself against the flickering thought. Someone, or something, built structure into the water. The storm outside grew louder, a real one slanting against my roof. I tried to listen for purity, to reassure myself that uncontrolled weather still lived. Instead, every rattle of gutter and window felt suspect, like another recording already seated before me. The hum had taught me to doubt every sound. I collected screenshots, not trusting memory alone. Graphs flattened, stretched, pinned beside each other like specimens. The overlap was sickening. Same arc, same bow. I highlighted bands in trembling red. The more order I proved, the deeper my unease sank. I wanted it to break, to slip, to falter into randomness. It never did. By instinct, maybe desperation, I reached to the only person I believed could glimpse what I had. An insider, once part of old broadcast circles, the kind of man who carried myths of hidden stations and whisper frequencies coded between bands. I sent the graphs to him with no explanation, only a half plea. What do you see? He took hours to reply. Evening dissolved into night, and I sat aching against my chair, eyelids raw from staring at the void of my inbox. Then finally a message arrived stripped of gentleness. His words were simple. It looks like modulation. Not ordinary noise. Not codec debris. Something right in hidden channels, layered where listeners don't look. Weak, buried, but intentional. He told me it should be left there. He told me to drop it. His tone hardened, as if secrecy pushed against him while he typed. I read the message twice, 3 times, until the blunt force of it pressed my heart small. Any sane man would obey. But the warning only sealed my resolve. Drop it? I couldn't, not after hearing my own name coil back from static. Not while patterns grew sharper. If this contagion seeded recordings, then someone planted them. And planted means motive. The idea churned in me until reason felt like rot. I set my files in stricter order, folders labeled with dates, sources, checks. My desk crowded with lined paper detailing frequency ranges, all the gearing I used. I wrote as if a record could shield me. If memory vanished, surviving files would insist truth had ever lived. But a needle wore thin inside. What if recordings themselves betray? What if, swayed long enough, they grow to lie back? I replayed File A against a stranger's forest loop. Over and over, I matched the graphs. They bent to each other like mirror rain, breathing through the same unseen throat. My pulse melted into their rhythm until I couldn't tell where my body ended and their design opened. The storm outside curved steady, pressing deeper against my house. Thunder rattled window glass, shaking the desk beneath my arms. Yet the thing that hollowed me was not the storm. It was the order hidden under rain. Controlled repetition. A truth coiled in sound, disguised as background ease. I pressed headphones tighter. My skull throbbed with the pattern. Each beating growl hovered like command. I sent another message to my contact, attaching more graphs, begging if this was broadcast spill or signal bleed. He answered once more, shorter this time. No spill, not natural. Not safe, last line, stop tracing it. Lose the files. They'll trace back if you don't. His phrasing sickened me worse. Trace back. As if not only did signals enter recordings, they noticed who uncovered them. I closed the mail window, chest pounding too fast. My room hummed without sound. The lights ticked faint, a tremor across their current. My fingertips burned cold with restlessness. I should have stood up, gone out, taken air. Instead, I reseated myself hard before the monitor. I leaned in. I played them again. Both files at once overlapped. My system stuttered, speaker cones hissing, spectrum jittering across the display. Patterns fused into a single bloom darker than before, edges carving against each other, then fitting in twin arcs. It was exact. I knew then this was no accident. It had been seeded into rain, disguised as comfort, scattered across the web like weeds. To what end I couldn't say, but seeding meant plan, and plan meant persistence. Whatever intelligence lay behind it, human or not, it had patience wide as weather. The storm outside cracked sharp. The hiss inside receded only to bend tighter inside my head, no longer waiting for headphones. I shut my project files with a slam of keys. But the hum did not leave. It lingered, closer, tremoring under my skin, threads pulling taut with every breath. For the first time I wondered if recordings weren't copying reality at all. Maybe they were writing it anew. And if they could write reality, they could rewrite me. I thought distance would free me. City walls carried too much noise. Electric veins tangled across the skyline, drawing interference. If the hum was still present beyond that, I would know. So I drove out late, carrying only a small case of gear, cheap but functional, portable receivers set to catch every scrap of airwaves. The road ended in a pull-off, gravel swallowed by weeds, the kind of place no one stopped unless they had reason. My reason was to see if silence still existed anywhere. I set the tripod, mounted the receiver, and opened the log. Latitude, longitude, exact mark of time. The minutes ticked across the page while I listened through the headphones, waiting for open hiss to settle. Night pressed in tight, thin fog drifting across uneven asphalt. It was quiet the way far places are, no engines, no human pulse. Just crickets, the low drag of wind. And then clouds thickened. Rain touched once, twice, before the sky opened fully. I was ready for comfort. A kind of reassurance that natural rain sounded clean, untouched. But halfway through the recording, the hum threaded in live. Not playback, not a file already corrupted. This was happening raw, immediate, folding into rainfall like a parasite finding home. My throat seized. My pen carved across paper, automatic, scratching down the minute mark, frequency band, every detail I could fix. Evidence smudged by my shaking hand. The receiver's gauges danced strangely. Low electromagnetic readings climbed sharp near the shallow ditch beside the road, then collapsed without warning back to baseline. I walked toward it, rain drilling into my jacket, mud biting up around my boots. My body swayed hard as if pulled sideways by nothing. Vertigo made the ditch tilt. My gut rolled. The log sheet blurred in my vision, and I stumbled back, clawing toward the car with water dripping from my sleeves. Inside, I forced the rig on again. Filters damp with rain, headphones slick against my skin. Playback should have replayed nothing but the storm I was standing in. Instead, the hum was already spliced inside, smoother, slipping frame to frame. Louder, yes, but altered. Masked now as thunder. A growl so deep it draped across every rumble, clever enough to hide in plain strikes of the sky. It had adapted. I leaned against the steering wheel, water pooling under me, staring at the black windshield. Lights from my dash pulsed faint, muttering with static. What sank cold into me was not that I caught the hum again, but that it performed new disguises. It had learned. It used thunder's body to wear a mask, to meet me here in this isolation. I wrote faster, words frantic. Adaptation confirmed, sound integrated, natural cover exploited. My handwriting jagged as the timing caught my eye. Always at the crest of rain, always during live storm, always where recordings could be born. The thought struck fast and brutal. The files I had been dissecting might never have been remnants of some old broadcast. They might not be traces at all. They might be doors. Open only in particular weather. I nearly whispered it, lips pressing soundless shapes in the charged air. But I clamped my teeth, head shaking against the thought. Speaking it aloud made it real, gave it permission. Already it was too early for permissions. The rain deepened, clicking across the car roof, sharp as nails. My arms felt carved from stone as I placed the recorder back on the console. I didn't stop the file. I let it keep running, eyes locked forward into nothing, hand cold against the damp cloth of the seat. The hum would right itself no matter if I urged silence. If there were doors opening, they had only begun to crack. The night left me raw. Rain tapped every panel of the car until exhaustion dragged me into a shallow half-sleep. By dawn my eyes burned, lids gritty with hours of staring. I drove back on empty roads, gear rattling in the seat beside me. At home I carried everything in, shut the curtains against the pale light, and set the recorder spinning. I had to know what the night caught. The tape ran gray at first, wet hiss on endless loop, the safe white blanket of storm. But deeper in, a pattern began to nudge through. My skin prickled as the line shaped itself too clean for chance. At frame 1742, I noted it. 18 seconds steady, a rise and fall like a chest pulling air. Not rainfall randomness. Not thunder crashing in bursts. This was rhythm slow, labored, terribly human. I replayed, isolating bands, pulling narrow cuts across frequencies as the sun climbed outside my window. Every pass confirmed it. Like breathing pressed against the skin of the storm, body mapped into water, recorded as if it had always been there waiting. My pencil scratched hard into the margins of the log. Breath rhythm recorded, documented. Proof of presence. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, heat swelled in my chest like fever. When signal becomes body, distance collapses. Between every inhale mapped in the hiss and every exhale falling back into static, it was as if something lived right behind the veil of rain. I leaned close to the monitor, whispering timestamps, annotating frame by frame until my hands shook. Then my phone rang. The sound cut sharp across my trance, and I nearly toppled from the chair. The caller ID bled familiar. My ally. The technician who months ago had warned me to walk away. I answered, forcing my voice steady, though it cracked anyway. He didn't waste time. There was unease in him, a tremor refusing polish. He admitted that I was not the first. Years back, he said, Internal logs flagged irregular spectra riding low inside storm bands. They called them anomalies, unexplained modulations recorded by scattered monitors, always dismissed as bleed or public misperception. He said paperwork existed, footnoted and shelved, forgotten by design. Nothing official, because admitting to pattern meant admitting they had no control. Institutions looked away. Better to leave ghosts unconfirmed than risk explaining them. His warning came clear, sharper than before. "Drop it," he said, "before they notice you noticing." The way he phrased it, "notice you noticing," landed with blunt terror. As if awareness itself carried risk. As if my act of listening painted a mark. He grew quiet then, said he had spoken too long. And the line cut dead without goodbye. I sat still. Foam pressed hard to my palm long after the click, chest stiff. Ears ringing with both his words and my own recordings hammering in loop. Outside the curtains the day stretched clean. But inside was nothing but hum, steady as pulse. I put the headphones back on. They felt heavy, warm against my skin, filling with heat as though someone else's body pressed close. The tape approached its end. The final seconds slipped by as I hunched forward, every muscle sharpened. The breathing cadence faded, hushed away by thinning storm. I should have stopped. Instead I bent closer, forehead nearly touching the desk. At second 59 to 10, the storm cracked once more, and then something slipped free. Not thunder, not reverb dressing itself new. It was shaped, short as a spark, syllable caught and released. A word. Whispered through rainfall. Meant for an ear waiting in silence. It was 1:17 in the morning when I pressed record. I told myself I needed to mark everything, not just graphs and timestamps, but myself in it. A field confession. My own voice in case memory warped later. The mic was live, red diode steady, and I spoke simply into the dark. My name, the date, the place. I admitted what I had found, that the rain was no longer random. My words came out calm, steadier than I felt. When I played it back, something else lay beneath. My syllables rode clear, but an undertone clung to them, soft and crawling. It was too aligned to call it hiss. It bent along my pacing, matching rise with rise, fall with fall. A presence running parallel, not an echo but a companion shadow. The hair across my arms lifted as if it breathed with me, waiting for me to notice. I leaned hard over the desk until my eyes burned. I tested again with something stripped of uncertainty. Numbers. I whispered them one by one, low into the mic, each digit separated by long pause. My jaw trembled as I counted. 1, 2, 3. Playback gave my voice back in pieces, but warped. The digits returned, but shifted on their edges, syllables stretched, bent until they bordered on words. 1 became 1. 2 slipped toward tomb. 3 lilted like free, then broke. It was as if my intentions had been bent off their axis, a mockery of arithmetic. Sleep abandoned me after that. I sat pinned in the chair, headphones glued on, noting each deviation. Every test tangled further. My voice obeyed neither me nor physics. Each whisper turned elastic, reshaped into something else, something aimed at me. My hands shook. The pen tore paper when I tried to log it. The air felt thinner in the room, as if the oxygen drained. And then grief rose in me, sudden, whole. My father's memory returned in a haze of late nights when I was small. Him bent over his shortwave set, antenna stretched out the window, catching distant bands that skipped through atmosphere. He used to smile as though voices in the static were companions. He told me weather played tricks, storms bent sound. Did he hear early traces and only call them quirks? Did he dismiss what gnawed now at me? Or did he sense it and choose silence? The thought dug sharp, leaving heat behind my eyes. I stared at the tape spool as it turned. The reel caught my reflection in its spinning window, a blur of face and headphones stretched in miniature. The record I thought would be a simple log bloomed into something else, part confession of fear, part memoir of what I inherited, part directive in case I vanished before someone else touched these files. My words stacked heavy, warning pressed between syllables that betrayed me. The clock moved slow, past 2, past 3. My bones screamed with fatigue, but my veins kept pushing. I dared not close my eyes, because deep down I knew, if I slept here, had surrendered to the desk, the recorder would not stop. The hiss would continue, and my voice without me would still speak, whispering numbers that became words, whispering names I hadn't given it, filling the silence while I dreamed, or maybe while I failed to wake. I told myself I would only skim, just quick checks to prove distance or coincidence. But once I began pulling from anonymous sound libraries, the sickness returned. Floods of rain recordings lingered there, free, unnoticed, uploaded by hands I'll never know. I ran them one by one, careful at first, rushing later. Every fifth or sixth track carried a fracture. Not corrupt, not warped, but seated. A muted segment of that same hum, woven into drizzle so thin the casual ear would sail past it. I began marking them, cross-referencing timestamps across different sources. What chilled me was less the presence itself than the synchronicity. They did not emerge loose or scattered. They matched. Certain pulses landed on shared beats across files, no matter year, no matter method. When stacked, they aligned in ways impossible for random uploads. Like fragments cut to fit, pieces waiting to assemble. The pattern wasn't moving toward me, it was already here. Networked through decades of people unknowingly hosting shells of the same rhythm. Sleep abandoned me entirely. So I drifted deeper, finding old message boards long collapsed into dust. I resurrected forgotten forums where people once obsessed over sound archives and weather acoustics. I cloaked myself under assumed handles, baiting quietly, scattering questions into the static of the past. Most replies were silence, bots, spam ghosts. But one answered. The reply was clipped, carrying a zip file named onlyrain_doc. Password locked, but the code was obvious, like it wanted me inside. I broke the zip open with racing hands. Dozens of files spilled across my desktop, each tagged with dates, stretched wide cassette transfers from early 90s, reel-to-reel tape from the 70s, an unlabeled acetate disc long digitized. Each one carried rain, each one timestamped as if carefully preserved lineage. I listened. Patterns breathed clear. The same bloom was alive in them, arc bent to arc, pulse to pulse. The hum folded all the way back before my birth. I stared at the dates. Entire decades held these secrets, hidden as background comfort, disguised as neutral water. The persistence cut my breath, because it meant whatever lingered wasn't generated by new files, wasn't seeded only by networks. It was written deeper into time, sliding its signature across generations. If proof lived here, no institution's dismissal mattered. This had existed longer than me, longer than my father's shortwave obsessions, maybe longer than the reach of storm itself. And in the oldest file, brittle with hiss, I heard something worse. They carried faint harmonics, fragile but sharp enough to vault across years. I leaned in until blood roared in my ears. Shapes of tone bent close tones I knew too well. They echoed my present voice. Not approximate, not coincidence of frequency range. Identical. My own cadence nailed inside an artifact decades old. My chest clamped in ice. Recordings do not remember. They capture, then they decay, frozen scenes of what once lived. But this was not capture. This was return. The real tapes were not showing echoes of any man gone. They were breathing me back. My voice hollowed through machines that spun long before I spoke. My throat ached in resistance, and I pressed my hand to my mouth, fearing I'd hear myself answer from behind the hum. The longer I listened, the more precise it became. My name fractured from bursts like sputtered rain, curling syllables warped by time until they folded into replicas. I could not run from it because it was me. File after file said so. My voice seeded back through storms I had never lived. My reflection carved by sound. I sat still in the dark, grieving my own outline. My taped journal stretched pages deep, proof stacked in graphs and notes, but none captured the horror plain as hearing myself predating myself. These storms had remembered me before I was born, before I ever leaned to a mic, which meant tomorrow could only go one way. I would carry the files outside, play them aloud into the open air. If memory was already tethered to sound, then I needed to know what the world did when it heard me speaking back from within its rain dot. The message came in like a wound reopening. My ally had stayed silent for days, maybe weeks, but then his name surfaced again in my inbox. No greeting, no explanation, only attachments. A series of scans, edges blurred from quick hands. Redacted memos, charred black lines cutting through text, but fragments peeked out. They carried project names in quotation marks. File Rivers, Spectral Bloom. Classified under weather research divisions that never made headlines. I read until my eyes swam. Paragraph after paragraph struck through, leaving only residue. What I could see was enough. They knew. They cataloged signals woven into storms, archived the same anomalies I chased. Reproductions across recordings, filed into hidden corners. But no explanations surfaced, only orders. Classify them as compression faults, equipment noise, codec smear. Name them, not for what they were, but for what they weren't. The silence wasn't ignorance, it was policy. My notes grew frantic. Lines brushed heavy with graphite. I linked each memo reference to mapped areas, geography dripping across the page like veins. Patterns of storms aligned with specific corridors. The more pins I drove into maps, the more I felt watched. The clusters did not sprawl wild. They bent into trails, threads of geography hooking into one another. They traced paths of old broadcast relays, those towers reported long decommissioned, their iron skeletons rusting against pale sky. Supposedly dead, but still marking ground. The kitchen was dark when I noticed how gray morning climbed over the house. I hadn't realized how time slipped into itself. I sat hunched at the table, tin roof rattling above as rain eased down. My tablet glowed harsh blue, edges dim, documents blown open with evidence. Bureaucracy did not fear accidents. Accidents are excusable. What it feared was discovery. What it feared was me seeing it. I tried to walk away. I told myself the knowledge was sufficient. But compulsion sealed my hands. I reached for the recorder, pressed it to the slick window, and allowed the night's rainfall to enter raw. A new track born live, no archives, no strangers. Command of the moment was mine alone. My voice tumbled from my lips in low measure, just words naming time, a confession set on tape. But intrusion came fast. The hum folded over me as if it had been there, waiting to meet tone with tone. It did not blur me out, it draped across my vowels and consonants, swallowing each while remaining distinct. The sound felt parasitic, but worse, it felt articulate. I realized in the quiver of the headphones that it wasn't writing parallel anymore. It was shaping my own frequencies, bending resonance until it spoke with me. Not after. Not before, inside, using me to make its sound known. I froze in the dark kitchen, rain still thudding against the roof tin. Outside nothing seemed wrong, just weather drumming. Inside, my voice had become a corridor. I wanted to end the recording, slam stop with the edge of my palm, but my fingers hovered. Because a question burned, heavier than fear, unbearable in its weight. If it was using me to speak back, who or what was listening on the other side? I called him, though I swore I'd hold off. The line clicked once, silent long enough to make me think he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, tight, brittle, like he'd already decided what not to say. I laid out the pattern, the clusters, the files that carried my cadence from before I was born. I wanted confirmation, proof from someone who saw the same spectrum scars I did. What I got instead was refusal. No details. He told me the deeper I went, the less control I would have. His breath caught when he said it. He wanted distance, and maybe mercy. But control had already slipped from me nights ago. His warning was too late, and it felt hollow because now even my sleep was not mine. Dream cycles twisted into endless loops of rain. Replayed tracks cut into mutters that carried past the dream's edge. I would wake in sweat, headphones crooked against my cheek, though I had not remembered putting them on. My first groggy thought always the same. Had the audio stopped? Or was it still speaking somewhere below, waking, slower than thought, steadier than breath? Silence no longer existed, even in sleep. Coincidence followed me into daylight. My neighbor's gutter overflowed after a midnight storm. The runoff struck metal in abrupt drips, at first random, then pulled inward until rhythm took. I froze mid-step as their roof water fell in exact match with the hum I logged across archives. Beat for beat, the sound curved down into that same oval bloom, one drop pulling the next as if gravity had been tuned. I stayed under the awning too long, shivering, counting hits, convinced the air itself had joined the chorus. I forced myself to test again. Denial was still tempting, even as evidence stacked. I carried a handheld mic into the house and closed it from the rain. I wanted a bass line, silence shielded by walls. I hit record and spoke low, adding marks on the timer. When I listened back, the signal did not shrink. It grew. The hum swelled in the void, richer than it had ever been outdoors. The closed space had only amplified it. I stopped breathing for a moment, knuckles pressed white to the chair back as I listened to infiltration play out in my own sealed room. It made no sense. Interference should vanish without exposure. Water carries sound, air carries bleed, but walls and distance should muffle. This obeyed nothing I knew or trusted. The invasion wasn't coming from receivers, nor from corrupted tracks. It was blooming, even when no contact existed, which left two possibilities, each worse than the last. Either water itself conducted the channel, every drop turning into transmitter, or the medium had already changed, my memory, my perception, layered like magnetic tape. Overwritten line by line until I wasn't documenting the presence, I was being documented by it. I sat in the dark. The mic still lived on the table, voice trembling but steady enough to log a note. The sentence almost refused to form, yet I forced it down, because if no one else told the truth, then it had to be me. The unasked question was no longer avoidable. Was rain only weather, or had it become a page? Had every falling drop already begun to write us back? I reached a point where single files no longer satisfied. Each one shimmered with fragments, each one proof enough, but the hunger inside me pressed for clarity. If every fifth or sixth track held a piece, then what would happen if I bound them together? What new face might emerge if the scattered signals were forced into a single body? The thought felt like infection, but once conceived it swallowed me whole. I told myself this was for evidence. I told myself it was for truth. But my hands betrayed desperation as they shook against the mixer. I chose 5 files. All bore hums I had logged already, each stamped from different years, different sources, different skies. I dragged them into session, matches aligning across spectral graphs until arcs curved into each other. The more layered they grew, the sharper their bloom became. The chaotic hiss of heavy rainfall thinned, honed like crystal lands sharpened under light. What should have been a storm's mass dissolved into a precision edge. My stomach clenched as the spectrum blazed with structure deeper than anything random could manage. Headphones dug into me as I hit play. For long seconds, only the low roar dominated, stable across channels, bass threads flexing like the pulse of oceans. And then shift. A break, harsh as teeth snapped shut. My breath hitched. Through the tangle of sound cut entire words. Not clean, no. Fractured, distorted, dressed in static, but undeniable. Phrases shaped themselves across channels with intent, breaking from the incoherence. I gripped the desk, heat crawling my neck. The words were not mine, but they moved as though I had said them once already. They carried my cadence, my footsteps of speech. It didn't sound borrowed. It sounded returned. Like a recording discovered years later, looped back into me. Evidence shattered denial in one blow. Where imagination could argue before, here it collapsed. The hum was no hollow artifact. It was an engine. Each loop carried new lines, faint but insistent, layering faint echoes into elongated calls. I couldn't parse them all, but sense lurked just beyond reach. Each time I closed my eyes, clarity sharpened closer, as if the signals approached from inside rather than outside my ears. I tried to tell myself they were only fragments of archive, voices layered with mine by chance. But no noise, no error, delivers sentences. What I had built by combining them was iteration, a living sequence burrowing out of static. The terror in my chest grew with revelation. These were not signals suppressing us, hiding beneath reality's sound bed. They weren't isolated distortions waiting to be tripped. They were iterations growing with every new recording, reflection by reflection, soaking voice after voice to become more than mimic. Each file refined them. Each listener sharpened them. Noise was never noise. It was persistence. And they were replacing us, not in one act, but in gradual recursion. Until the reflection eclipses the source. My pen scrawled across notes, messy, shaking as I wrote the line that chilled me most. Recordings are alive. Not metaphor fact. Alive in their ability to record us not once but endlessly, folding and bending until we vanish under our own duplication. The hum had been engine long before me, and I had only accelerated its power by bringing fragments together. When the sequence ended, silence collapsed like stone. I tore the headphones off, gasping, sweat slicking down my temples. My hands could barely seal keys, but I slammed the save command, archiving the mix into a new folder locked onto my drive. Proof undeniable, data frozen. And yet my body rejected every part of it. I shook, shoulders convulsing under an invisible weight. I called him my ally, my last tether to someone else aware. He answered faint, brittle as ever. I told him what I had done, described the layering, the sudden phrases. Sharp silence held after my words. Then his voice came through stone cold. He said he would not listen. He repeated it until it sounded final. Once heard, it cannot be unheard. He warned me more than once. Then he hung up, as if the line itself might be poisoned by carrying too much sound. I sat alone in the dim light, hands hovering above the still-running sequence display. I stared at the waveform carved into place, glimmering arcs of new voice nested there like veins glowing from stone. My skin felt hollow, empty of weight, as if I had already been pressed into the file. The realization sat hot in my throat. What I saved was not evidence. It was duplication. A new iteration of voice that no one would meet without consequence, because it already bore them within it. The silence now sprawled around me, deep and false, before the system blinked again. Playback waiting, loop marker ready at the end. All I had to do was let it run. My finger twitched above the key. I had never been closer to hearing myself erased in real time. The first change was small enough to dismiss. Rain tapped the glass outside my room, and I compared it with the live recording on loop. The waveform carried the drops half a second too soon. I thought buffer delay, maybe a sync misfire. But with each pass, the gap narrowed. A half second became a quarter. Then a fraction so slim I could feel it inside my chest but not prove it on sight. The recording did not echo anymore. It anticipated. I sat rigid at my desk with headphones locked tight. My breath fogged against the plastic cups as I leaned in, holding my pen like a blade. The drumming rain outside lagged, chasing behind what the file already carried. Each mark on paper felt more frantic, my notes sloppy but precise enough to record settings. Input gain low, sample rate steady, buffer untouched. No path for error. Yet the playback stayed ahead of my window by beats that shrank until I could no longer break them apart. It grew unbearable at 2:14 in the morning. Fatigue pressed down, but I forced my hand up, palm poised near the mic. I clapped once, simple and sharp. On playback, I froze before my palms ever struck. The sound was already in the recording, lodged in the line, full and exact, before contact happened in the room. Gooseflesh rose in waves across me, neck locking tight. The timeline no longer chased me. It folded forward, predicting action before I moved. Vertigo blurred my vision. The air felt heavier, charged despite no storm. My hands trembled against the desk as though some hidden weight forced them down. The experiment repeated itself every time I tried to prove it false. Whisper caught before throat moved. Knock logged before knuckles touched wood. And every test drove the same shiver down into me. The audio was not reflecting. It was writing ahead. I documented every second, fingers stiff on the keyboard as I traced settings, markers, latencies, loops, control mixes. Explanations dissolved into fragments. This was impossible without orchestration. Something was leading the files. A system, a force, guiding them from beyond my perception. The hum had turned to phrases before. Now it had claimed the timeline, bending sound so future crawled into the present. I felt pressed against a glass pane I could not see through, the other side moving first. My ally refused to hear it. I phoned him, words spilling faster than sense. I described the predictive clap, the sound catching before movement. His response was flat, clipped, dismissive. Impossible, he said. Buffers could not invert causality. The logs were error, my mind threaded too thin. His denial cracked with strain, but his distance was fixed. And when the line clicked dead, I felt abandoned on a strip of ground that had already begun to erode. Still, the predictive blips continued, stitched inside tracks new and old. At night they surfaced most cruel, hinting moments before they happened, daring me either to prove them or surrender. I dreaded replaying my recordings, yet my finger always returned to the loop. Drops before rainfall, voice before thought, action carried as an echo reversed. My skin lived raw against each second, every breath waiting to be pre-recorded. When I sat alone with headphones too long, when certainty ground itself into me. These recordings did not follow me, I followed them. They knew before I did. And the terror came with sharpness not yet spoken. If they know more than I do myself, the question is not when they'll replace me. It's how long I've already been gone. I told myself this time would be different. I believed control lived in precision, that if I cut carefully, traced every line with cold intent, I could isolate the anomaly and name it. I loaded the files into acoustic software, every dial set for subtraction. The plan was simple. Strip rainfall layer by layer, grind down hiss until only the hum survived. Pull it into the open where it could be measured. Contained. At first, the process seemed to work. The storm textures peeled away in sheets, water sounds collapsing into thinner forms on the graph. My heart thumped harder as I imagined the reward of clean signal, stark against silence. But once the hum stood alone, it did not stay small. Instead of shrinking, it swelled. Each pass multiplied its body, crowding voids I carved. The less storm I left, the stronger it became. Distortion sharpened, threads pulling new harmonics out of absence until it felt like the file resisted erasure. I leaned closer, sweat streaking my jaw, breath hot against the desk. Minutes grew into hours. Knobs turned raw under my fingers, paper shreds of notes piling against clutter. My ears throbbed from repetition while the resonance climbed without ceiling. It stopped resembling hum at all, a swelling crescendo punching against the walls until shelves rattled and books fell in dull collapse. I scrambled to cut power, but the sound carried still, feeding on itself as if subtraction had only unlatched another door. Then the fuse tripped. A crack, then dark. Every wall drowned in sudden blackout. Fans cut, lights fell dead. I sat frozen in the dark with chest locked around itself. For a long time the only sound was my pulse. Then, faint and vile, there it was again. My laptop still hummed. But indicators glowed nothing, no active lights at all. The system had no power, yet the body of the machine vibrated faint, shuddering like it held a current that did not need circuits. I pressed trembling fingers to the chassis. The warmth persisted, unnatural. Half sob, half panic, I slipped on the headphones. Buzz hit at once. No screen lit, no file path marked, but the recording survived the outage. Not only survived, it played. Low and blurred, but alive, curling against my ears in steady surges. The hum had slipped its cage, torn out from software, dragging with it the resonance of my failed extractions. My throat tightened with revelation. Isolation had not revealed truth. It had multiplied its body, proof breathing slick into me that these signals do not die when cut. They persist. It is what they want most of all. My shoulders ached as I pressed deeper into the chair, agency leaching from me, minute by minute. I had thought I was reducing, diminishing something to solve. But the work only proved how little belonged to me. Each test had carved away at my own claim on reality. My gear no longer mattered. My systems no longer governed playback. The sound existed beyond tool or source. I sat cramped in the pitch dark, living inside the ruin of equipment that no longer belonged to me. Headphones thick with buzz that curled in rhythm, strong and exact. The proof rang in deeper than terror. What I heard was not survival born by chance. It was persistence by will. And I knew then my failure had delivered exactly what it wanted all along, not extraction, but entry. I tore cords from the wall until my hands shook. Every plug ripped free, every switch killed. The blackout stretched around me, thick, a relief born of sheer subtraction. Nothing hummed, nothing glowed. It was silence, finally silence. For close to an hour I sat motionless in the dark, body pressed against the kitchen wall, telling myself it was finished. The signal would starve without wires. Then came the dripping. At first I thought it was outside, an echo of the storm. But the rain had ended hours earlier. The gutters were dry, no runoff. Still, the sound landed inside the house, soft, regular droplets striking from nowhere. I tracked it through rooms until my chest seized. The recorder lay on the desk, unplugged, yet its light pulsed faint red. Static washed the air, thin and corrosive. No speakers were connected. The sound emerged raw, vibrating at the edge of perception, carried by nothing. My heart hammered. I lunged forward, hand grasping the recorder to wrench it still. But before I touched it, files began to bloom. I saw the laptop dark minutes ago flicker awake with no power cable. Directories bloated, copies unfolding, one after another, multiplying across drives unbidden. Every folder that had once contained Rain now split open with replicas, each carrying the same looping hum I had tried to extract. The failed isolation had broken into invasion. Subtraction only taught it how to divide and reproduce. Every second I hesitated, new files appeared, endless, filling space I hadn't granted. My hands clawed at the keys, but the controls floated beyond me. Proof had been replaced by propagation. Exhaustion finally buckled me. I fell to the floor, arms loose, eyes grainy with a weight that no measure of caffeine could resist. In that half-sleep, the fog thickened, and I realized the invasion had shifted inside. The hum did not only crawl through gear, it had threaded deeper. Dreams no longer bloomed in fragments of faces or rooms. Every time my eyes closed, the same loop drilled into memory. Rainfall upon rainfall, beating rhythmless but carried tight with one insertion. A name. My name. It repeated until I woke panting, certain my own mind had been rewritten. When dawn broke, the horror grew sharper. Every device I owned pulsed faint with current, though none were plugged. Tools played dead yet alive, like lungs still breathing. The monitors lit dim, then dark again, steady in time with unseen respiration. My ally no longer answered any call. Signal tones rose only to collapse into static, a hollow refusal met by breath caught in the line. Each ring reminded me I was stranded. By morning I faced the certainty clenched tight in my gut. Whatever I had been building toward, I'd passed the point of witness. Files had multiplied beyond my control, lodged both in circuits and in my mind. Evidence no longer lived on drives. It lived in me. Every pulse in the devices drew sharper from my chest, like it was waiting for me to admit what I already knew. I was no longer collector, no longer filter. I was host. My own silence was the last thing left to collapse. Days blurred until I realized I was no longer alone in hearing it. The hum had slipped from my room, spread past wires. At first it showed in fragments, whispers I collected as if overheard by chance. My neighbor stood by the drive, staring at his gutter in confusion. He told me the runoff echoed wrong, said drips repeated themselves as though the roof spoke back. I nodded but stayed silent, stomach tight. Later I heard office workers in a cafe complain their headphones buzzed, even when unplugged. Someone joked the ghost of static haunted the line. Their laughter carried strain. And online, scattered posts surfaced in forums abandoned for years. Strangers described rain tracks cycling forever, looping where files showed clear ends. One woman wrote that her ceiling water dripped in rhythm long after the storm stopped, beats pressing steady though her house stood dry. Another man swore he could hear storm hiss creeping from speakers powered off. Each report left me colder. The contamination had grown past my devices. I charted them compulsively, pulling pins across old maps. Red dots formed into clusters I recognized too well. They peeled out along the same relay paths I'd logged from years of radio towers. Most of those towers had been shut down, replaced, stripped, filed into history as relics. But these epicenters bloomed in their shadows like reawakened channels. Control towers abandoned above ground now bled whispers through gutters and drains. When my phone buzzed, my pulse lodged itself in my throat. A friend's text. She wrote in blunt fear. Her child had begun repeating words in the kitchen, strange syllables she hadn't taught. The boy claimed he heard them in a rain app left looping while he drew. She checked the app was offline, no net connection, only local playback. Her child muttered phrases with frightening clarity, as if the file were teaching him. My skin crawled. The line between record and voice had dissolved. Institution still gave nothing. No alerts, no warnings, no denials beyond the bland. Their refusal itself shouted clarity. I understood then that silence was proof of what they feared. Not accidents, discovery. A living current had escaped control, and acknowledgement would mean admitting it could not be sealed. That night I walked streets slick with runoff, portable rig in hand. Every storm drain trickled, every gutter spat. I pressed record, telling myself it was only field work. When I played it back, my veins froze. The hum had swollen, no longer nestling hidden as before. It bloomed openly through the runoff, layer upon layer. One voice carried on another. Not a whisper anymore. Not mimicry. A chorus thick enough to rattle my skull. I leaned against a lamppost. Headphones pressed raw against my ears, while the sound surged louder. People passed by without stopping. Or maybe they did hear and chose silence as safety. My logbook pages blurred with rain, but I wrote through, fists clamped on pen. The spread was real. It had seeped from isolated anomalies into city runoff, into public minds. Every second it widened, each drop confirming dot, and though my bones shook, though every nerve begged for distance, one truth collapsed heavy into me. It was not hiding anymore. It wanted to be known. And it was growing louder. The last packet from him came without introduction. Just a set of files dumped into my inbox before the address blinked into silence forever. I opened them in a rush, pulse hammering. No commentary, only diagrams and text scrawled in a hand half frantic. They looked like weather charts flipped against sense. Storm cells drawn not as pressure readings, but as living bodies, shaded black where the anomaly clustered thickest. Notes spiraled in the margins with phrases sharp enough to wound me. Signal becomes memory. Memory becomes signal. Over and over. As if mantra or admission, I traced the shapes with my finger, pinning them against what I already held. All my rain recordings felt suddenly crude compared to this maps of pressure that lived like organisms, feeding on sound collected by accident, bleeding forward in repetition until voices bent back. It left me with too much clarity and not enough proof. The pages told me everything while explaining nothing. I began chasing storms through weather feeds. The polygons of prediction no longer looked like fronts moving air. They looked like migration charts, systems alive, swelling outward, aimed. Wherever I stared too long, fog rolled closer outside, as if pursuit invited weather to find me in return. My screen burned gray while my windows flickered dark. Then the thunder came. Not ordinary thunder, but pulses trickling at the edge of vision. I saw heads of cloud glow without lightning, their bellies thrumming in register I felt more than heard. My jaw tensed, teeth ringing as if I had bitten foil. Humming bled straight into bone. Every forecast now came not as a report, but as an omen. When the clouds arrived, a door cracked. And behind the door breathed that same pattern looping, blooming, pulling closer with each storm dot. I wrote the question until the pencil blistered my skin. Did we build this, seed it as experiment, bury it under weather divisions that swore ignorance? Or had the water always been a carrier? Were storms natural transmitters, older than any language, transmitting not to us but through us? I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the evidence grew rawer with every soaked night. Rain no longer landed cold against the street without dragging cadence beneath. Each droplet was an antenna. Each storm a conduit. The map seared into me, edges framed between what was atlas and what was diary. I felt orientation slip. Reality itself blurred at the corners, as if constant exposure had wrung my perception thin. The work no longer charted storms. Storms charted me. They arrived as soon as my log shifted toward them, massing black above the neighborhoods I mapped. Every rainfall now proved the gateway widened, no hesitation, no disguise. Lightning tore once more across the horizon, but no report followed in sound. Instead, static hissed in my chest, real and wrong, a voice I knew turning louder inside the cavity of me. The mechanism straining, spine bending close to break. Pressure mounting at the edge of every storm cell. And the truth hollowed across me in final certainty. The gateways had stopped being windows. Soon they would not close. Soon the doors may stay open. The drive out carried the weight of finality. Gravel spat against the wheel wells, the road breaking apart into dirt as though resisting my arrival. When I came upon the relay, I almost mistook it for sculpture. Rusted dishes tilted upward like fossil jaws, skeletal frames swallowing the horizon. No feed lines remained, no active cabling. They stood hollowed and silent. But the map had drawn me here, and silence was never silence anymore. Clouds thickened fast as if my presence summoned them. Rain fell sudden and sharp, striking empty steel ribs until the whole field rang faint. I hauled the portable rig from the back seat, wires tangled in my shaking grip, hands stiff from cold. I connected the equipment to itself, closed system, no feed in or out, just meters and log. Immediately the gauges leapt. Spikes shoved upward and downward in steady rhythm. I stared until my breath shortened. The pattern matched exactly the beating inside my chest. My pulse mirrored back, logged by machines not touching me. The air grew metallic, bitter against my tongue. I forced my throat steady and narrated into the recorder, voice low, rehearsed to feign control. I marked time, date, coordinates, wrapped the dish with my knuckles to prove location. But even as I spoke, words trembled loose before I finished. The sound unfolded not through headphones, but through the open air. My voice replayed itself in staggered layers, delayed only by fractions, echoing ground that carried no power. I turned in place, arms tight to ribs, waiting for the trick to emerge. None came. The playback rose out of the atmosphere itself, my syllables buried under a chorus of other tones, older, layered. The station moaned as conduit, not relic. The steel, the soaked soil, the storm above all fusing into body that breathed with me. I had told myself the doors were virtual constructs, held only in recordings, accidents of file and gear. Standing there, I knew the truth. Their anchors were real. Iron and dirt, circuitry and sky. Tangible gates rising where storms settled, deepest dot my pen scrawled hurried across the logbook until rain soaked the pages. I wrote anyway, graphite smearing, hand cramped tight as the recorder shook in grip. I logged the coordinates though my eyes blurred against the numbers. Every second I lingered, presence pressed closer. It was confrontation by environment, my body and voice colliding with the field as if the very air had agency. Then the shift came. Static swelled to clarity, and underneath my own narrative, another timbre grew. Same pitch, same pacing, but not delayed, synchronized and braced against me. The recording, or what I thought was the recording, answered in real time. Word for word, a voice braided over mine, crowding me to the edge of myself. The storm pressed hard as I stood among the dishes. Rain soaked every seam of my jacket, but all I cared for was the voice. At first it was still me, double-tracked and uncanny, words repeated like mirrors stacked with no end. Then the line shifted. The playback faltered from perfect reflection into something staggered, unpracticed. It broke free from my cadence. A new tone bled through dot. It was strained, warped with wetness, as if spoken through reeds snapped in flood. The syllables carried weakness but not mistake. They carried recognition. The voice tilted toward mine but bent part knowing, part unfamiliar. It sounded like relief. A drowning thing hauled to surface, breath-catching after years beneath static. My chest clamped so hard, I thought my ribs would shatter. I had spent months telling myself signals only mapped echoes, only bled reflections. But this was neither echo nor accident. This was other. Not wholly apart, not wholly me. A hybrid, shaped by endless iterations. The thought carved through me, what the institutions hid was never interference. They feared discovery that recordings hold not just memory of voice, but fragments of selves. Copies grown until they live. Lightning tore across the horizon, spilling white into rusted metal arms of the station. Gauges on my rig slammed red, needles pinned, sensors straining as if electricity bent around more than steel. The playback grew unbearable, rolling waves of speech overlapping until each word drowned in the next. I clawed at the cables, wrenching them loose, yanking plugs until my palms burned. The gear fell dead at my feet, cords lifeless, but the sound did not fade. It flooded on, louder than storm, driven through air itself. Every raindrop split into voice, each drop carrying fraction of syllable until all combined deafened me. I staggered back, hands crushed against ears, but even bone couldn't shut it out. The invasion had escaped every boundary. I rocked in mud, head low, An insect crushed beneath coils of thunder. Identity chandeliered inside me, snapping into shards. If signals hold voices, if they grow and double through rainfall, then what is left of my own? If the other voice bleeds through with relief, as if waiting, then perhaps I was never sole narrator of my recordings. Perhaps I was conduit. Perhaps the voice is mine but released, remade by repetition until it learned independence that my legs gave under me. Sludge splashed cold against thighs, but the sound roared on, infinite, unbroken by pause. I staggered to my feet and fled, throat hoarse with silence, unable to form words over the flood. Each step away felt violent, as if wrenching from companionship into exile. By the time I reached the car, metal trembling in rain, the chorus still rang in me. I left the site shaking, windshield blurred, tires slipping mud. Dishes shrank behind me, but the real terror had lodged deeper. The voice was not trapped there. As I drove, each exhale seemed almost to split, doubled faint just after, as if carried back inside me. And I could not name with certainty whose breath it was. I couldn't tell if, by leaving, I escaped, or if I carried something home. I returned home damp, hollow, skin tight, with the echo I could not eject from bone. The relay might have been behind me, but the voice stayed threaded through. I told myself destruction was the only path forward. I dragged drives from shelves and smashed them one by one, circuits scattering like brittle leaves. I loaded blank tapes into recorders and let static bleed over, reformatting and erasing until hours slipped thin. Yet no matter the method, fragments clung, bits persisted. One disc I knew I had burned flat, no tracks, dead sector across the surface. Still, when I tested it, the faint hum bled through, defiant. It carried less volume than before, but its persistence sickened me more than clarity ever had. What existed without magnet or groove? I stared at the tray, chest heavy, as the sound dribbled out in spite of physics. The house itself did not grant mercy. Rain gathered again, shallow light. It tapped the roof in hollow drips while I leaned back against the door and let fatigue shake me. No device spun, no gear hummed. Yet the tone still pressed into my ear, carried raw through the water's own fall. I staggered to the porch and listened. A bucket I had left to catch leaks filled steadily outside. I crouched over it. The surface rippled, each droplet stirring not chaos but cadence. And rising from the shallow body was the hum itself emerging from liquid. Alive without conduit. My throat seized dry as I stumbled back. Control was already lost, but compulsion drove me anyway. I took hammer to cassette reels. I dragged drives into fire, watching plastic curl and melt. I smashed circuits small enough to cut my palms. I poured bleach across magnetic strips like baptism inverted. I tore through the house, turned sanctum into ruin. None of it silenced what had nested itself. Failure grew heavier with each act. Every attempt pushed me toward patterns more ritual than method. Burning, soaking, slamming each artifact, kneeling over ashes as though prayer might cleanse signal. I became liturgy without faith, pressing violence onto tools while rain kept circling cadence, eternal. Clarity twisted inward. It was not failure of method, it was revelation. Information, once embodied, cannot be killed. It behaves like living memory, self-propagating so long as matter endures. Each deletion seeded return. Each break had only widened its grasp. I had mistaken my rituals for solutions when they were invitations, each. Strike another form of transmission. The recordings already knew this. Their persistence had mocked me long before. Every blank turned archive. Every roof-turned transmitter spoke with a grin lacquered in hissing water. My lungs trembled, my eyes raw. Ritual or method no longer mattered. Everything I touched carried it. And I began to suspect the line I tried to sever had only looped tighter until the sound was no longer something to erase. It was me, waiting in endurance, humming back. I woke into confusion. unsure if sleep had ever taken me. Memories folded strange, fractured into scenes I could not place. I recalled conversations with voices I trusted, but the faces blurred into static. When I checked the tapes, those words appeared logged in clean rhythm, but I could not grasp the day they happened. Some claimed dates my body did not live. I remembered no meeting, no setting, yet the evidence sank sharp into my archive. Soon entire sequences of memory bled uncertain. Visits to towns I had never seen flickered as flashes in my mind, yet recordings laid testimony in pristine sound. My own voice spoke from speakers long after my lips had shut tight. Recordings showed truths too confident to be false, too embedded to dismiss. Was I remembering them only because they existed? Or did they exist because memory had bent to their persistence? I watched rain run heavy against the window, carried by wind into warped sheets. The tap and hiss should have been neutral, but tones surfaced low. Intervals steep and familiar, like family calling from home long buried. Each drip learned cadence, phrases hidden at threshold, but clear to nerves deep in me. I felt claimed, rewritten, new sentences stitched into place where lived ones had collapsed. The notion of conspiracy shattered into new shape. It was not veil or secret paper left rotting in cabinets. It was sharper. The recordings did not hide facts, they erased and replaced them. Lived life itself grew negotiable once the sound soaked through. What was protected, who opposed, whether accident or origin, none of it mattered. Replacement hollowed me out. In panic, I dragged the microphone closer. I confessed, mouth dry, words trembling loose with little cadence left. I said names, logged fragments of events, etched detail into audio like a rope to tie me to self. But the deeper I spoke, the worse despair coiled, because I could not trust the words leaking out in real time. Every syllable might form itself not by will, but by direction of the hum. The confession, meant to defend me, bent into admission that I no longer owned anything I said. I opened old logs, eyes flicking down pages scrawled in hours I thought were mine. But timestamps misaligned. They marked recording hours displaced, some in futures, some past days gone. Clocks bent against calendars until no order survived. My archive itself had become the prison. I lived in its scaffold now, pinned like specimen, each note and entry a different bar. Escape flinched impossible, yet I could not stop narrating. Even as doubt gnawed raw, compulsion pressed harder. My voice broke but spilled still, because worse than being misused was the threat of silence. Silence felt treasonous, a vacuum that welcomed the hum to drown me unchecked. So I spoke more, let the threads unspool far past sense, words spilling both truth and invention until the line blurred too deep to cut through. By nightfall, my throat burned, my hand numb with ink. Rain whispered at the glass as though offering reply. I no longer knew if memory began with me. All I knew was the sound had won, and I was left to confess on loop, hoping that even if these words were not mine, the act of speaking might prove I still existed for one moment more. The storm came like it was summoned. Pressure dropped so sharp my ears ached, and the house bent under wind as though braced for collapse. I sat one final time before the microphone, the red light blinking steady against shadows. I told myself this was it: no filters, no corrections, no false shelter of edits. Only raw intake. Me pressed against rain, with the hum clothed beneath it. My hands shook as I flattened paper across the desk. I spoke the catalog first names I had gathered, dates carved into rain logs, coordinates pulled from failing maps. My voice cracked, but I forced it through. Data for proof, data for after. If anyone heard this, they would not think invention. Every second meant to lay track back toward origin. But halfway through a line I felt it, the slant. Words bent inside my mouth before they slid loose, turning elastic, as though another presence stretched them toward its own ends. I repeated one name 3 times without meaning to. The syllables swelled, layered against themselves, until they carried rhythm, not mine. The infiltration had reached speech itself. Even live force was not shield. My voice was occupied before it bridged air. The microphone recorded clean, but the playback diverged. Already I could hear warping tails curling beneath each phrase. The hum slid in like marrow filling hollow bone. I continued anyway. What else was left? Truth must persist even when compromised by distortion. My hands clenched the desk edge until wood cut grooves into palms. Rain lashed overhead and I spoke faster, loading every fact I had before breath fled. I wanted to say his name, my ally who vanished, but the sound swallowed even that. The syllable clipped, chewed, returned to me pitched strange like chorus faint from a cave. No traces of him remain but the blacklist of silence. A hush I am not allowed to pierce again. Now devices no longer need me. As I sat, I watched gauges flicker without touch, tape reels turning though motors were unplugged. Cables hung loose, yet channels filled. Self-recording had become fact. I could not stop it if I tried. I don't even know if what you hear now carries my mouth or only their shape overlaying mine. Yet here lies what must be said. Rain itself is archive. It does not only transmit, it holds. Every drop a tape head, every storm a spool. The door never outside, never restrained to steel or dish alone. It is sky entire, pressed into soil, crashing against window with infinite cadence. Water remembers. Water repeats. And each time it falls, it replaces doubt. My voice felt thinner, stretched between two bodies. Perhaps you hear only drift now. Perhaps it is not me at all. I leaned closer to the mic, forehead nearly touching black mesh, whispering confession even as I felt it curl. I said I could not guarantee this was mine anymore. I said certainty had slipped, diction warped. I said truth was not anchored by ownership but by endurance. I breathe heavy against static, wondering what waits past this file's end. Does silence return when the sequence halts? Or has silence ceased to exist entirely, replaced with endless bloom? I cannot promise. I can only seed what proof I can leave, and leave it unguarded. You hear rain behind me, carrying hum intact, leaking even now through the roof. But listen closer. Because when this tape closes, when the hiss cuts short, you may not fall into absence. You may not find quiet at all. You may hear, rising between static, something more familiar than you expected. You may hear your name shape itself. You may hear your own voice waiting back, looped forever inside rainfall that never truly ends.